All of you should be talking to your customers and figuring out what it is that they actually need, as opposed to the things that they might send in through user voice or random customer support emails, or those conversations that you have when you go out to sell them. Because it's a very different sort of problem space that people are talking about. But I have found that it is really, really easy to put off interviewing, because it is a different skill set than what most of you are using most of the time, doing and making and telling everyone that the impossible thing that you're doing is not actually impossible. So after a lot of working through this with various startups and teams within Microsoft, I have found that the best approach I've seen for people to be successful is literally to just jump in and do it, like all the other things you do, and time box it so that you're not spending a lot of time thinking about it, and you will do a crappy first interview, and then you'll have it in the books, and then you'll get better. So we're going to go through kind of a workshop of how you can get your first crappy interview done, and we have our volunteer who's going to actually do that, and we're going to debrief, and we're going to talk about how well he did and how well I did as an interviewee as well at the end. So the first thing I'd like to say is basically just that. You're going to time box it. You're going to look about how can we cram this down into a little tiny amount of time and write down some really terrible assumptions and some terrible questions and all of that in a minimal amount of time. This is something I actually really like doing as a team around a whiteboard, and a lot of times with stickies, so that you don't have that kind of effect where the loudest voice drowns out everyone else. Even before you get to the interview stage, I have found this to be incredibly useful for teams who might have been sitting across from the same table for the past 6 weeks, and yet when you start to write down what you actually think your most important value is, you will find that the person across the table wrote down something different. So a good exercise to do even when you're not interviewing. So how are we going to get to the first interview? We're basically we'll be approximate on the timings. You just need a timer and a friend. Your first interview, you actually probably want to use someone else who's in this room, because one, they're in the same situation as you, and two, it doesn't really matter if they're your customer, because you're going to do a crappy interview anyways. So call upon one of these other people who are smart and not in your exact headspace, and go ahead and do a practice interview with them. You will learn all the things where, oh, I thought my intro was great and it wasn't. Oh, I thought I had really interesting questions and I don't. Or I found myself kind of railroading my peer into, don't you want this thing? Because that's the other mode that we find ourselves in. So finding the friend who will be your interview partner, and also every stage along this improves by having just a new set of eyes on something. So for example, one of my friends was interviewing for a job in my old team at Yammer, and I gave her some advice on how to write an intro email, and she sent it to me. She didn't say she was going to send it to me, and I opened it and I just went, ah! And then I was like, okay, point by point, these are all the things in which this email struck me as weird and bad, and I didn't really want to respond to you, even though I know that you are a charming and smart and qualified individual. And if she had said, I'm going to send this email to you first, I feel like I would have had a softer reaction, because it's my friend, right? But if you just send the email and then text your peer and say, hey, I shot you over an email asking you for an interview, let me know what you think. Then you will get all of the warts and all, like, you sound like a terrible spammer and I never want to talk to you. So, big thing we're going to do. We are going to write a hypothesis. Hopefully you already have a hypothesis, so this part should be fast. We're going to think about what we need to learn. That doesn't mean starting with the questions, because when we start writing questions from the start, we usually write weird, overly formal questions. If you've ever gotten a survey from a large corporation like the one I work for, you will recognize them as questions that no human has ever read out loud. Everything you ever write to customers, by the way, you should be able to say out loud without feeling like a tool. That is one of the best tips for everything, marketing email, invitation to interview, etc. If you can't say that promise and be like, oh, it's wrong. Because if it is something that echoes the words that your customers use, they will repeat them to other customers. And then you get more of them. And that's how we all stay in business. So we are going to talk about how to take effective notes. This, again, is surprisingly hard for people because it's not the same as the way we took notes when we were in college, back whenever that was. We're going to do a practice interview. We're going to debrief, and we're going to talk about how that interview went well and how it went really not so well and what you guys are going to do better, because you're all going to be smart going forward. And then we're going to talk about how we summarize and move on. So for those of you who have really small teams, this is a little bit less important. But honestly, as long as you have more than one person, there's a certain amount of telephone that happens. The bigger your team is, the more important it is that you summarize these interviews well. Because you will keep learning in each one, and if you don't keep everyone kind of abreast of what's going on, you will 3 weeks in realize that you have pivoted, and everyone else will be like, what the heck? Like, why are you doing this? This doesn't make any sense. And you will seem flaky and like you can't focus on anything, and that's not actually what you need. So we're going to go through those things. So the first thing, write a hypothesis. I hope you have hypotheses. Do we have hypotheses, by the way? Kind of, sort of? Okay, so we'll go ahead and do this. Your hypothesis is basically, why do you think this product or feature will be successful? How is it going to make someone's life better? That's a very high bar because it's very hard to have a successful startup. So when I hear people say things like, I want to create a marketplace where people who create artisan furniture can have their stuff seen. No, that is not a hypothesis. That on the face of it is not making anyone's life better. Now they could say, I think that consumers' lives would be better if they were more able to make educated choices about the things they buy for their house. That may or may not, that could still be bogus, but at least it's a hypothesis. You could say, I want to empower artists who work in their spare time to reach more individuals because right now they're not making enough money and they still have to work at Starbucks. That is also a hypothesis. But marketplace, store, Uber for X is not a hypothesis yet. So it's also not a feature. And you're startup, so you're probably less guilty of this than Microsoft, but Microsoft is the worst at having a hypothesis like, I believe customers need to be able to create this kind of PowerPoint filter. Because no one ever said that, and also PowerPoint is terrible. But a hypothesis might be, I believe people struggle to create compelling presentations, and there is some kind of PowerPoint designer which was actually created to address that hypothesis. But we all like to start with features because they sound impressive. And if you're a product person, you really like speccing them. And if you're an engineer, you really like coding them. And if you're a designer, you really like designing them. So it's kind of the best thing, except we're going to step back from that. And a hypothesis involves people. So your hypothesis will never be the product itself. It will be the humans who have chosen to give you money in exchange for that thing, or have given you their time in exchange to learn how your thing works, in which case you're going to monetize them somewhere else. But at any rate, there is a human whose implicit question is always going to be, so? Is that a question? By the way, yes, you can totally interrupt with questions, because that's how I usually work.
The question is, when should you write this hypothesis? Is this a hypothesis of your product and company? Is it specific to the customer that you're about to interview? Is it based on, if you're doing a QBR, should you just have a general, this is what we're trying to figure out right now? At what point should you be considering?
Yeah, so when should you write a hypothesis? All the time, basically. If, for example, you were thinking of quitting your day job to start a company, you really better have a hypothesis as to why you think this is actually going to be, a good idea. You will have kind of an overarching one per customer segment. So for example, if you have a multi-sided market, you might have 3 hypotheses because you have the user and the buyer and the person who's selling advertising, and all of them need to have their needs met. And you will probably focus on one at a time because it's just really hard to do all 3 interviews, but you will eventually need to do them all. You will also have kind of an overarching hypothesis and probably ones that bucket underneath it as well. So you might say, I believe that people need better collaboration tools in the workplace. And then underneath that, you might say, there are people like retail workers who have very little autonomy and aren't generally trusted, and they're going to have this set of needs. And then there are managers who have to keep track of people who have this set of needs. And then there are, highly paid professionals who are creative who have this set of needs. And any one of those can be validated or invalidated, mostly invalidated. And you'll also keep rewriting them because a lot of times you'll be wrong. You will assume that you knew why something was happening, and it turns out that it was not.
So per persona, basically.
What?
Per persona.
Yeah, per persona. Keep re-looking at them. And sometimes you'll have a hypothesis and you'll end an interview and kind of feel like, well, that didn't make any sense. Are you talking to the wrong person? Are you asking the wrong questions? Maybe you just realized your initial thought was wrong. No, people don't really care about this. Or they care about this, but they really care about this. So a hypothesis template that I like to use generally kind of looks like this. I think this is actually different from the one in the book because it has been 3 years. And so we keep iterating, as we should. So I believe this kind of person, this is your target market. This is your first target market. If you're in a multi-sided market, you have multiple of these. But this is not, I believe I have 3 different types of customers and I'm going to munge them all into this. If you really want to do that, you're going to write multiple hypotheses. And you will get these slides. So this is going to be people who are roughly similar in terms of behavior, not demographics. Demographics don't count for anything. It's what people actually do that matters to you. So if your customer is a 60-year-old grandmother versus a 23-year-old millennial, it doesn't really matter as long as they both want to buy your product, which occasionally happens. So I believe this kind of person could be, busy commuting parent. It could be small business owner. It could be millennial software developer, what have you. I believe this kind of person has this problem. Not they would like to do this, but this is actually a thing that is bumming them out, and they're waking up in the middle of the night being stressed about it. And a problem is something that they're having a really hard time doing, or something that they are incapable of doing because the problem exists. And it happens while the context in which it happens, and then which allows them to do X. So if we solve this problem, how would it make their lives better? And I ask that question a lot. It's a thing you should ask yourselves a lot because people don't buy your products, they buy the capabilities that your products and services allow. So let's take a few minutes to write a hypothesis. I'll say 5. As I said, if you're working in a group and you're sitting next to people in your company, write them separately, laptops or sticky notes, and don't share until a few minutes are up. Okay. Let's hear a couple of hypotheses. Who wants to share one? Or I will just call on you, old school. Anyone want to read theirs out? Thank you. You in the back.
I believe female athletes need to solve the problems associated with knowing what best to eat and how to train during their period, which allows them to help optimize their performance and reduce the risk of injury.
All right. So you got a key demographic, so that's going to make it easier to find the kind of people to talk to. You have a problem that you think that they have. Your question is going to be, really, are they willing to pay to solve that problem? It's a pretty reasonable hypothesis. I like that. Let's hear another one.
I believe small business owners need to solve the issues around finding customers and building an online presence, which happens while they're putting together the rest of their business, which will allow them to earn more revenue and save time.
All right. Why do you think they're not doing that already?
Difficult, tricky, not sure how.
Okay. That was a trick question there, or not a trick question, but a bonus question because it wasn't in the thing. So that's always a thing I like to think about as well. It's like, why aren't people doing it already? And the same thing would apply to you. Are people not doing this now because there's no solution or because they don't care enough? Just a thing to kind of keep in your mind. Let's hear one more.
I believe that small engineering firms who self-perform their surveys need to reduce the high costs of their topographic work, which happen while they're performing earthworks projects, which allow them to increase their margins by billing accurately.
Okay, that's hard to follow. So let's see. So you've got a target market there, your target customer there. They're spending too much money now?
Yes.
Okay, on a very specific kind of project. Yes. Okay. All right. Well, that is one where I would encourage you to, as you're doing your interviews, listen for potentially broadening, and I would start maybe with what is the worst thing, what is the biggest problem, because that may be a valid problem where there are other bigger ones. But it's a good starting point. And that's the beauty of this. These are all good starting points. These are all good enough starting points. I didn't hear anyone who gave me a feature in disguise. I'm going to assume the rest of you all didn't do that because I railed against it. So let's keep going. All right. So what are we going to do with that? I started to say from there, what do you need to learn? So you have a hypothesis. You're obviously going to try and prove it wrong. And we are going to try and prove it wrong because the worst possible thing are the mistakes that cost us a lot of money and time. So we, don't take any false pride in saying, I nailed it on the first try, because you didn't, and that's just going to be more expensive later on. It's just like bugs in your code. If you can find them while you're writing it the first time, it's really cheap. Once it's out in production, out to a bazillion people, it's incredibly expensive to fix. So we want to catch those early. So what do you need to learn? First of all, you need to make sure that's really a problem. You need to kind of answer that so what question. And you need to think about, what are people doing today? What are the environment they're in? What's frustrating them? What is constraining them? How are they actually making decisions? And so a lot of times there's kind of a series of things we can think about, which is just literally, what are people doing today? Not in any relation to your product, but how are they going through their day-to-day, kind of one step abstracted up. So could be, if you're looking at something around, hair color, could be something around like, what is your general beauty routine? Because that's going to get into some of those frustrations and constraints, such as like things that you don't do because you have kids and it's not worth paying the babysitter, plus everything else. You're going to look at frustrations, because the things that people are expressing emotion about are the things that they are most likely to actually want to solve. So there are a lot of things in my life that are mildly frustrating that I do not spend any money to fix because I don't care enough. Starbucks coffee is not actually that good, but I have the Starbucks app on my phone and it's really fast to pay for it, and so most of the time I end up drinking it because it was just easier. So if you ask me questions around what was my favorite coffee and what was my optimal coffee experience, I would give you one set of answers. It would have nothing to do with how I actually behave. You want to see what's frustrating people. You want to see what's constraining people. So in the small business owner case, it seems likely that time is their massive constraint, because they're busy, they're doing a bazillion things at once. But in some cases, it might be money that's someone's constraint. It might be a lack of knowledge. It might be legal or security restrictions. So if you're anyone who's working in education, banking, healthcare, there's a whole slew of rules that they probably don't want to adhere to but have to, and you have to live within that. If there's a difference between the buyer and the user, that's a constraint. Sometimes this is even things that seem silly, like social constraints, which are very real, and most people forget to ask about. So for example, I remember seeing a sort of maligned blog post a while back making fun of teenagers who all needed iPhones because all of their social lives happened on iMessage. That is not a fake thing. If you are 13 and your entire social life revolves around everyone sending iMessages and you have an Android phone, you are missing out. And that may be irrational that everyone doesn't use Facebook Messenger or GChat or whatever, but it's what is happening. And that is highly traumatic if you were actually that kid. And if you wanted to make that customer happy, you would acknowledge that this is a real thing. You'll also see examples like this when you talk about anything that's kind of tackling health and fitness. In a family situation, there is usually one person who's really into it and one or more people who are not. And that is a massive drag on the system. If you want to eat kale and your husband won't eat kale, then that kale product, you're going to sell it once and not again. So we want to get to all these things. And we want to kind of get at how that decision-making happens. So is this an RFP approval kind of thing? Is it a snap judgment? Or normally I wouldn't pay for this, but the kids are screaming, and for God's sake, I'm going to buy a DVD and put it in the car so that they shut up kind of situation. You might be in a product where people are going to pay for it under duress, and that's actually fine. Just don't mistake that for when that doesn't happen. So a lot of times we just kind of think about what are the things we need to learn, write them down not as questions but as things, and then we'll work on the questions next. So how do we actually do this? To transform those into questions, if you kind of have the vague thing in your head of this is what I need to learn, you want to start by abstracting up a level. So again, not hair care, but beauty, not commuting, but getting to work or your morning schedule, etc. Not this specific project, but projects in general. You want to start with open-ended questions that aren't even really questions. because your opening is really to get people to feel like it's okay to tell you stories. And the tighter the question is, the shorter the answer you're going to get, and the harder it's going to be to ask follow-ups without sounding like a jerk. So you kind of want to start with, like, tell me about how you do this. And then you're going to go with follow-up questions to everything that you find interesting. So when you find yourself with a very tightly scoped question, try and broaden that back out. The ultimate tightly scoped question is the yes-no question. Those are the worst because neither answer is really helpful. You know, would you buy this? Yes. I don't know why. I don't know whether I should trust that answer. And if someone says no, I don't know why or what I could do to change it. Even along the lines of something like, one of my favorite examples is someone who was working on a product, I don't even remember what it was, asked me, is it hard for you to find childcare when your kids are sick? And I said, yes. It is. But that's not the right question. The right question is, does it matter? And the answer to that would be no, because I have a pretty flexible job and I can work from home and, you know, I just put them in bed or, you know, park them in front of the TV and I work from home and it's fine. Like, I would not spend money for a solution that made it easier for me to find random sick day babysitters because I don't actually need it. And so when you ask that yes-no question, you can get a lot of yeses and nos that make you really confident in a direction that is still wrong. I feel strongly enough about this that when I find myself asking them, I will actually stop and reword the question. So when I ask someone, you know, is this a problem that, excuse me, let me rephrase that. How big of an issue is it when this happens? What kind of consequences happen when you run into this issue? Because you will get a much better set of answers out of that. And then you're going to prompt for the details that matter. So the shorter the question, the better. You know, tell me about when this happens. Oh, that does sound frustrating. Could you tell me how many people are involved when that kind of situation occurs? Okay. Oh, so you're unable to do this. Well, when you're unable to do this, what else falls by the wayside? If you are gentle with your kind of like, let me ask, or just in case, you know, I want to be clear on this, you can ask a lot of follow-ups without seeming obnoxious. That is one of those art, not science things, but I am a big fan of the, you know, just to be sure I'm clear, and okay, let me see if I've got this straight. And because you're going to be asking the 5 whys, like, to put a toddler to shame. So what are your questions going to look like? Some good general question templates, and then we're actually going to take some time to write them. Our good general question templates are, you know, as I said, tell me how you do blah today, preferably abstracted up a level from the specific problem you're trying to solve. You're going to ask about what people did before and after, and this is important because the scope of the problem that we think of is often very narrowly defined, but there's stuff that happens before and after. Like if I go grocery shopping, the first thing I'm going to do is like open the cupboards in the fridge and look and see what I'm out of. And then I'm going to go to the store. And, you know, if I have the children, I'm going to pack the children into the car, and I'm going to have to like feed them first. They don't ask for things in the grocery store. And then we're going to get home, and I have to put it away. So there's actually, you know, at least a half an hour of buffer work on either side of the actual going to the store. And you'll see the same things in, you know, enterprise situations as well. Someone who's sending out an email marketing campaign is going to have the double check the Excel spreadsheet and then send the test version and then send the next test version and then send the real thing and then read it over again to make super sure that they didn't make a mistake, because we do, because we're humans. And that whole thing is part of your process. I like to ask people about workarounds or tips or tricks. Depending on your audience, you're gonna kind of, you know, phrase that word differently. So workarounds, do you have checklists? Do you use apps? Do you have hacks? Do you have Post-it notes, etc.? Giving people, oh, there's one of those that got cut off. I think that's what that one was. Asking people what advice they would give is a really useful way to put them in kind of that learning mindset again. So when you ask someone, how do you do X? They're going to answer as best they can, but the truth is, as humans, everything we do as a routine becomes routine, and we don't realize all the steps we go through. We just kind of assume that, well, of course I have to, you know, jiggle the handle before I flush the toilet, or of course I need to do this. If you ask people what advice they would give a new person in their situation, in an enterprise scenario, it's a coworker, in a social scenario, it's a friend, but like, what advice would you give someone if they were just getting started with this thing? I have seen this have a massive like shift in how people answer to where something went from being, oh yeah, that's fine, to, oh, okay, so if you're just starting with this, these are all the things you need to look out for. You know, skip this part, you know, install this. You're gonna wanna go look for an add-on for this. Oh, I have an app for you. Oh, here's a list that you should go through. So putting people in that advice mode is great. It also makes your interviewee feel smart, and people like that, so they will like you more for giving them the opportunity to feel smart. And then finally, the best possible question of all time is the magic wand question, because one, it's kind of funny, and two, inevitably people come up with great things for this. So if you could wave a magic wand and change anything about whatever your problem area is, what would it be? Doesn't have to be possible. This is where people get to that heart of the matter, and because it is a stupid sounding question, they feel okay giving you stupid sounding answers. So if you're like, I don't know, I just wish magic pixies would come and like clean up after my children. That is the root of the problem, that there is stuff, there are children, they're creating a mess, and nothing seems to be able to keep up with it. You're probably not going to, you know, display magic pixies, although, you know, maybe someone's working on nanorobots or something, and if you are, but you want to get to that problem, so magic wand question is awesome. Follow-up questions. Follow-up question templates, you know, this is, once you've done this for a while, this will come really naturally, and when you first start, it does not. So just kind of keep in mind, I usually have like a separate note for people who are new to this, of like, remember, when people say things, these are follow-up questions that you should ask to continue the conversation. You're going to want to ask things like, how often has this problem happened? Remember, people have recency bias, so something that just happened is going to feel like much more of a problem than it might be. So the person who's like, oh my God, this thing happened, you know, the systems went down, it was a mess, it was a disaster, like I would pay anything to have this never happen again. Wow, that sounds terrible. You know, in the past month, in the past 6 months, how often has something like this happened? Well, just the once, but it's a very different scenario. Now, if just the once took down your whole business, that might be worth solving for, and there's an awful lot of security firms, reinsurance, et cetera, that take care of just that. It could be that, yeah, geez, I mean, that's happened 3, 4, probably 6 times in the past 6 months. Okay, that's a problem they should solve, and now you have a good sense for it. You want to ask what they've done already, because this is a good cue as to how often they will be to do anything. So someone who has not tried to solve your problem in any way whatsoever is probably not going to be your customer now. Sorry, but it's true. The solution doesn't have to have been good. It could have been an Excel spreadsheet, you know, an email reminder I send to myself, a checklist, something on the refrigerator. These are okay solutions, but it just, the gap between 0 and something is immense. So you have the person who says like, yeah, I've been really trying to lose weight, and you're like, what have you done so far? And they can't come up with anything. Not taking the stairs instead of the elevator, not parking a little farther away, not, you know, not ordering French fries, nothing. Probably not going to take an action today. What you also learn from people who have actually tried to solve the problem is how successful were they. You get a sense of how comfortable they are with technology, how willing they are to spend money, how willing they are to do something that's embarrassing on the face of it. These are also useful things to know. If this was magically solved, how would your life be better? For those of you who already have customers, this is actually a brilliant way to shut down people asking for stupid things that you should not build. So anyone who has a customer ever has gotten a request for a thing, you guys should really add blah, blah, blah. And I work for Microsoft, so we're like in the kingdom of that. For every enterprise customer in the world thinks we should build 6,000 billion features. And the answer is, that's great. Thank you so much for letting me know about that. Just to make sure I understand, if we built that, how would it make your life better? How would it make your job easier? And you will get a lot of, it would just be nice to have. Well, your competitor does it. Bullshit. Like, you don't have to do that, and you shouldn't. You should not focus any attention if that's the best answer you get. If someone asks you for something and you ask that question, they're like, well, if you did this, I could finally do X and Y, and good. Prioritize it according to that. And let's see, what do we have? Oh yeah, and how high a priority is it to solve this? So you're listening for frustration, you've asked about that, but also you just kind of want to know, because some people are real venters, and those of you who have customers that are all over the world will learn about geographical stereotypes about how much people are willing to vent, and you will have to taper your questions and what people say accordingly. Someone might go on a rant about something that is terrible, and then you say, how high a priority is it to fix? And they'll be like, well, I mean, I wouldn't spend money on it. Or, well, it's not the worst thing that happens. And again, push those aside. So let's spend some time writing questions. You don't need a lot, 4 or 5, but think about the things we talked about, which is, what do you need to know? Current behaviors, frustrations, constraints, how people make decisions. You made eye contact. That's the mistake. So now you have to keep on going.
So my first question is usually just describe your current workflow. I want to know what they're currently doing to get kind of an idea of what they have to do on a day-to-day basis for this piece of software.
Okay.
And that usually kind of gives me
Okay. Let's hear another one.
My questions are for freelancers. So how do you currently, or excuse me, tell me about the last time that you got a new customer. And how did you feel about the process of getting that customer? If you had a peer that was starting a freelance business, how would you tell them to acquire customers?
Oh, they're good starters. Let's see, let's hear someone else.
Yeah, so just a bit of background. We provide video interface and debugging tool for audio and video communication. So we would say like, what are the top 3 quality issues you face with your video communication platform, and how often does it occur? Which one would seriously affect your business? And what are the current tools for monitoring the issues? And how much time your customer support team and development team spend on it? And what would be the budget you would be allocating to solve these issues?
Okay. 2 things, because these are sort of widely applicable. How much time is going to be biased by how annoyed the person is at any given time? So I vastly prefer asking that as something that happened in the past, and you will know what the best time interval is, but you will get more accurate answers if you say, in the last week, how much time did you spend on X, versus how much time do you spend on X? It's a subtle difference, but when people actually do the recall, they tend to be accurate versus, kind of like, I don't know, 20 hours, which might be completely wrong. The other thing about asking how much people will spend, those of you who have done pricing know that it's, 1, it's really hard, and 2, people generally are not honest. Sometimes because they're being jerks, but often because we just really don't know how much we value things in the moment. So if someone is willing to tell you that, awesome, and that is great. But a kind of a workaround for that, especially if you're kind of early and you're not really sure, is to ask what kinds of analogous things people are paying for today. And if it's something you've heard of, you can go look it up yourself. You don't have to even ask them. But if it's not, you could say, if you don't mind me asking, about how much does that run a month? So when I was, I actually attended one of the True Universities, one of the first ones, when I was working with Kissmetrics, and we wanted to see how much people would pay for web analytics software. And of course, when we asked that, we got everything from nothing to, hundreds of dollars a month, which was not helpful. And so I asked people what subscription products they were using for their business, and that was very helpful in finding people who were like bragging about, I literally never pay for anything. It's like, awesome, congratulations. That's probably good for you right now, but also means you are not my customer right now. To people who were talking about, $19 a month for user voice and $29 a month for this, and this much for Squarespace and that kind of equivalent. To people who were like, well, we pay $55K a year for a site license for Qualtrics, and I was kind of like, okay, that gives you the range of how much money people are willing to spend on things. Here, another few questions. You. Yeah.
Describe the perfect response from a customer after you engage them about the feature.
Like that. So how would you ideally want people to respond when you put out a new feature? What'd you get at that, I wonder? That would be my follow-up question, I think, after someone answered that, is to say, like, how would you expect, if you could wave a magic wand, how would you want to get that reaction? Oh. So the questions you have, again, your first block of questions doesn't have to be perfect. It's not going to be, but it gives you that sense of getting people to talk, getting them to give you more of the narrative so that you can ask the follow-up questions. So I'm going to ask the questions. You've got some good questions. You need to actually take notes in a way that makes sense. The question I generally get from the audience, so I'll just go ahead and say it here, is, should I record these instead? And no, probably not. Because one, as soon as you involve recording, you need to ask someone if it's okay if you record them. And that starts off your conversation with a weird dynamic where people get all self-conscious. And most of the time in these interviews, you're asking someone to admit their incompetence in some way. Because if they were perfectly competent, and this is not a dig on anyone, it's like we're all incompetent as humans. If they were perfectly competent, they would not need your product. And so what you want to dig in on is the way in which they are not competent today. And that means they're going to have to cop to some stuff that they probably don't want to, like that Post-it note stuck to their monitor, or like the fact that they keep having to IM their coworker to ask, what is the password to that thing again? You want to give all that stuff, and they don't want to be recorded. Also, you will never want to listen to these interviews again. It's torturous. Even if you've gotten past the point where you hate the sound of your own voice, which for me it took years, even within that, it's a long time. These are 20 to 30 to 40 minutes. You're going to do a bunch of them. You're never going to want to listen to this again. There are tools that will record, and you can do things like press a button when someone says something interesting and fast forward to it. Try them out, see if you like them. I've never been a huge fan. What I recommend instead, which has another useful hack, is having a note taker, because this does two things for you. One, it ensures that at least one other person is hearing the customer say this. If you have a person on your team who does not particularly like being customer-facing, I would say engineers, but it's not always engineers, this is a good person to be a note taker, because you don't have to talk to the customer. You don't have to answer questions. You don't have to, be polished at all. You're going to do this over the phone. You can do these from your jammies, but you're going to take notes, and so you're going to listen. The other thing it does is if you have a second person, that second person will notice when you ask biased questions, and they will kick you under the table, or send you something in the back channel saying, dude, don't do that. That's really, really useful to getting better at interviewing, because you don't notice when you ask bad questions until later, if at all. But even I still ask biased questions, and I've been doing this for a bazillion years. But if I have a note taker in there, and I'm like, don't you want to? They'll just look at me, and I'm like, let me rephrase that. If you were to have, super useful to have that really tight feedback loop. So if you have the note taker, you can just talk. You can focus on having the conversation go. You don't really have to think about anything. What are you actually going to do in that note taking? You want to hear the things that invalidate your assumptions. So all the things that you believed going in, every time you hear it like, ooh, I didn't realize that. You write that down, you put like big asterisks and circles around it, because those are the things you don't usually want to hear. If you hear something that validates what you want, you write that down too. But like listen twice as hard for the invalidates, because that's what we don't want to hear. You want to listen for emotion of any type, because this is effectively prioritization. So when someone sounds really excited, or you hear them go, yeah, let me tell you about that. Or they get really angry, or they get sheepish, or they like, God, this is so embarrassing, I don't want to tell you. That's good. Everything that comes after that is super useful, because that's their way of prioritizing. The people who deadpan like, yeah, it's the worst thing ever. I'm like, really? Unless they just sound like that all the time, it is not the worst thing ever. So anytime that someone expresses emotion, that's where you want to make your little asterisk. You want to ask follow-up questions. You want to, like poke at that until you kind of feel like a jerk for continuing to ask them about this thing, because that's how you're going to extract value from them. If you are talking with coworkers who have a rolled eyes expression to emotions, I would say listen for customers being emphatic. Emphasis. No, nothing squishy about that, but it's the same thing. And you're going to want to take down verbatim quotes. So I said this is not like taking notes in school. You are not summarizing because you need to understand the life cycle of the cell generally. You want to know because the difference between someone who's like, this is literally the worst part of my week is very different from someone who's like, yeah, this really sucks. Those bits of nuance, when we can get those down, I have heard other people quoting customer quotes in meetings months later when I'm not there because that was resonant enough to stop people from doing something stupid. Like, no, I remember the person was like practically in tears. They're like, this is the worst thing that happens to me. Like, we can't do this to them. So, super important. When I am bringing a note taker in, I have literally sometimes given them a template, like a Word doc or a Google Docs, with the validates, invalidates, emotion/emphasis, like weird other shit, and let them take notes in those sections because that's really useful. And I see a hand, so I'm going to answer that.
This seems like it requires a decent amount of skill to be able to capture the right things and pay attention to it. Do you know of any services or anywhere that you could recruit someone just to help for an interview or a series of interviews to do this?
Any of your friendly neighborhood user researchers, this is what they do in their day job. This actually, like the dirty little secret is this is basically just user research that happens to care about business models too. So any freelance researcher would be great. Again, you don't have to get it perfect the first few times. You're going to do these, and later you're going to look at your first few notes and realize that you didn't capture anything, and you'll just get better at it. But it is a skill worth cultivating because you can actually do this with everything. I do this for internal processes. I just changed roles within Microsoft, so I tell people that now I work there on purpose because before I was acquired in as a startup, and now I deliberately chose to work there. And one of the first things I did in my first few weeks is do 21 internal interviews with program managers in my division, basically saying, how are you talking to customers today? Because they have all read this book, and in some cases, they are applying it in terrible ways, usually because their managers have encouraged them to apply it in terrible ways. And I knew the only way that I would actually know that is to talk to them. So you will use this skill forever. Tell me about how you can do that for figuring out why hiring is going bad, why your meetings are terrible, in addition to customers. So I gave someone the advice just today. I was having coffee with an entrepreneur before I came here, that one of the ways to transition into it is to start with a contractor who is a researcher, and in the beginning have them run the interviews while you take notes, and then switch, because they will know when you're screwing up and they'll kick you under the table. And then once you're better, you can bring it in-house, which saves you money. And also, if you're the founder, you should be hearing the unpopular truths from your customers anyways. So we don't need to take 5 minutes for that because I basically just said that. How are we going to get people to talk? We're getting into where we're going to actually do our interview. So probably not a problem for me because I like talking. But for a lot of your people that you're talking to, especially if you're not selling to people at a company, they're not selling things that they use for their job, most people are a little self-conscious about talking, and they kind of assume that everything that happens in their life is boring and you don't really need to know. And so it's very common if you ask a question for someone to give you like a one-sentence answer and stop. And what you want them to do is keep going and going. And so you want to start with, kind of an intro that's like short. It doesn't really focus on you a whole lot. It focuses more on them and why they're interesting. So a lot of times I will say something like, thank you so much for talking to me. This is really useful for me to be able to learn from whatever kind of person you are. Like you, there's a lot that I can get from research and from knowing the industry, but honestly, there's no substitute for people's personal experiences with how they do their day-to-day whatever. And so this is going to be really helpful. Don't worry about being boring. Nothing you could say could possibly be boring. Sometimes it is, lie. And then say, do you have any questions for me? Okay, great, let's jump in. So you're going to do that short. And this is the one part that might actually be worth memorizing because it's nice if you can roll that whole thing off without stammering. Everything else is going to be ad hoc. You're going to ask that first question, and then you're going to shut up for what seems like a very uncomfortably long period of time. I think I say 60 seconds in the book. That's actually like psychotic. Don't do that. But like 30, I mean, really, you can make little non-committal noises like, But even seems like a signal to stop talking. So you ask someone something, they're like, oh, that's not really a problem. You're like, Well, I mean, sometimes it is. And they'll keep going. So you do that the first time. Don't keep doing it because then you sound like a jerk. But you do it the first time to kind of communicate, like, really, I meant it. Nothing you said would be boring. You don't need to give me a one-sentence answer. You could give me a paragraph. It's okay. You're not going to do the yes-no questions. You're not going to argue with their experiences ever, even if they're clearly wrong. And they will be sometimes. But just let it go. So someone who says, like, I think X is really hard, and you're thinking to yourself, what are they talking about? It's the easiest thing in the world. Don't argue. If someone says, like, this product doesn't exist, and you know it exists, don't argue with them. Just let it go. If you really need to tell them about that product that exists, you can do it at the very end after you've thanked them for their time. You will, especially when there are things around like social experiences, like I talked about the iMessage example, like that's where you're going to want to be like, really, seriously? Don't. You're super neutral right now. You're not selling your product. You are interested in everything they say. You are like a therapist. That's why you don't actually have to pay people for this, because people pay good money to have these kind of conversations with licensed professionals. You are unlicensed, so they'll do it for free. So that's how you kind of get people to start, warm up. All of this is kind of surrounded by the context of you being trustworthy. But a lot of times I've found that people try and give a little speech ahead of time to establish their own credibility. And you really don't need to do this. And it seems weird because no one wants to talk to like telemarketers. But if someone cares about a problem, they want to talk about the problem. And so you don't need to tell them that you are, you have a PhD in X or you've been an engineer here for 20 years because that's about you and it doesn't really matter. Sometimes people will ask me like halfway through the conversation, like they suddenly realize maybe they should ask, like, wait a second, can I ask, like, what do you do or where do you work? That's fine. But in the beginning, it's all about you. And so you want to feel like as approachable as possible. In fact, I always sign my emails from whatever division I'm in as opposed to Microsoft, because no one wants to talk to Microsoft. It's like a giant faceless corporation. But I'm always very clear that this is like Cindy from Yammer, Visual Studio, or whatever smaller, manageable piece that you're going to have. So let's do it. Madison Reed, friend, you want to come on up? All right, assume that we've already had a pleasant exchange in which he asked for 15 minutes of my time, and I graciously agreed because this is the thing that I care about.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited about this because we've been doing a lot of research into routine, especially around hair. Could you tell me a little bit about your own hair routine?
I feel like I used to have one. So I have 2 kids, and that's maybe sort of the answer to this. So I have 2 kids. I'm also training for a marathon, and so I spend a lot of time either not paying attention to my hair or doing terrible things to it, apparently. So my life hack is that I go to the gym every day because I don't shower in the morning. And so I get to my office and I am gross and unshowered, and there's a gym right there, and so I always kind of feel like I might as well go to the gym before I take the shower. Which means that I usually wash my hair using the terrible gym shampoo. So that's kind of the first shower of the day. I don't do much with it because then I'm at the office and there's usually a meeting that I have to run to. On days that I have long runs, my hair is getting kind of gross. It's been baked in the sun for 2 hours. I get home. At home at least I'm using decent shampoo. But otherwise, I don't do a lot because I'm not sure what I could do, I guess. I actually posted on Facebook the other day asking for recommendations for some kind of hair treatment that would fit within the face mask and white strips kind of period of time, because I feel like at least once a week I'll do that. And I might as well load all the things on at once, right? If I can do all the beauty routines at once, great. And I dye my hair because there's no way I would ever get to a salon. And so I use Madison Reed. So I think I vary the time periods because I'm not that good at dyeing on certain intervals. It's more like, oh, wow, I really need to. So every 6 to 8 weeks.
You decide when to color.
Oh, when I look and I'm like, oh, there's just a lot of white going on here.
Oh, a lot of white. Does that happen often?
Yeah, every 4, 6 weeks, yeah. It's usually this case where I'll kind of look and like groan and then be like, when am I gonna have time to do this? You know, when am I gonna get the kids to bed and have the energy to do this? But it's relatively easy at night.
Do you do anything so the white comes in? Do you do anything else besides just color your hair to solve that problem?
I mean, I'll tweeze out the hairs when I see them and they're egregious, but usually it's just kind of like immense. I'm like, I can't tackle this with tweezers alone. Yeah, so grown is probably the only other thing.
Is that your main concern, or do you have any? How many concerns do you have about your hair? Is it really just the white hair that's coming?
It's the white hair, and now since I've been running more, my hair is a little sun-baked, so like I can kind of feel it's a little crispy now. But
Does that only happen in the summer?
yeah, I think that only happens when I'm running for 2 hours out in the sun a couple times a week. Generally, it's probably okay.
Do you use any products for that?
No, because I'm lazy. If you told me what products, that's literally, I would like someone to just tell me, like, use this, and we'll send it to you.
How do you get advice right now about which products to use?
I usually post on Facebook. Yeah, and then depending on who answers, like I have a bunch of athlete friends, and I tend to trust their advice because I know they are similarly time crunched and practical. Yeah. Okay. Does anyone in the audience have any more questions for me? Yes.
I wanted to know when you purchase the hair dye, do you buy 10 at once? Do you order it?
So they have a subscription thing. And actually, my husband told me about this because I was complaining about the white in my hair. And he's like, there's a company that does, like hair dye at home by mail. And I was like, I'm signing up right now. So you can set it to come like every 4 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever. And I think I have it at 6, but then I'll get in a situation where I have like a box and then there's another box coming in a week. So then I'll shift it back. I really like the fact that I can always do that, by the way. Yeah.
How much do you generally spend on each box?
I have no idea how much it costs. I am relatively price insensitive with these things. Like I signed up and they charge me something and I don't care. You could probably charge me more. I wouldn't notice, honestly. But I think this is, it's one of those things, like beauty things in general, if it works and it's not egregious, I'll just spend it. Just make sure it comes to me. Like I had 2 free hours the other day and I went to Sephora and I was like, I'm gonna try on everything so that now I know, and I took photos of everything so I know what I can order online in the future. Anything else anyone wants to know?
How did you know at first what color to pick?
They have like a little configurator thing where you can say your skin tone and your hair tone and you're cool or warm, and I'm not sure how accurate I find that, but I found having it to be comforting. So I think that's, because I've done things, I've claimed that I am cool toned and warm toned, and all the things I get seem relatively flattering. I don't know how important that is. But I also feel like I would have been a little lost without it.
If you had a magic wand and you could fix or improve it in any way, what would you?
I would want, you should tell me to buy more stuff.
Yeah, that's
Like,
kind of where I was going. 'Cause
yeah.
I'm really interested in the routine right now around
Mhm.
things. Like, what other is there? I found through a lot of interviews, people have a lot of concerns, so I'm trying to drive towards understanding what those concerns are, and if we can package it all up together in a way that like solves the same kind of frequency and business problems that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think you have a touch point with every time you tell me that you're about to ship an order would be a really good time to ask me, like, what else do you need? Or here are things that we think you might need, because I would one-click order them. Because, yeah, it's like I've already committed to spending money a certain amount of time. Like I used to have the julep makeup delivery thing, and I just, at some point, I have enough makeup. But we came every month, and then they would always be like, do you also want crazy colored nail polish? And I usually didn't go for it, but I felt like probably a lot of people did because they were very appealing looking photos and I could just tap and you've got my credit card. Yeah.
What did you like about the process of trying on to make this work?
Oh, because you can see what things actually look like. I mean, so Sephora is like, I think they're a great business example of, you know, makeup is expensive and it's kind of a commitment and, you know, especially like as a person of color, there's a lot of makeups that aren't quite formulated well for tan or darker skinned people. So you go to, you know, if you go to, you know, CVS, all the stuff is going to look weirdly pasty on you. And you don't know that until you've bought it and you've wasted the money. So I can go and I can try everything on. They have well-lit mirrors, and they have like all the makeup remover stuff, so you can put it on and then scrub your face off and then do it again and again.
Have those samples, if like you had samples all available at home, would there be something missing from that experience?
I mean, there's a certain amount of discovery, but they do send samples, which I like. And I think you could just send me samples, and I would probably like that. But yeah, there's a lot to be said for just, if I'm doing my hair anyways, that means the children are in bed and I have some peace and I could try anything else out. So I think it's more, there's some impulse buy to being there and being like, ooh, I could get shiny gold eyeshadow, which I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. But yeah, otherwise it's just get the thing in front of me and have me try it when I have some time to think about it, and then I'll spend money.
Is there anything else besides time preventing you from going to the salon?
No. I mean, I have kids. It's time, and I mean, I'm a certain segment of customer for whom that is my one issue. Yeah, I would have to do something with the children. Sometimes I'm just like tired, like I can't cope with this right now. And I know friends who got really into Warby Parker because they were like, I wanted to try on glasses, but I just didn't have like the mental energy to look at myself in terrible glasses. But they had the box, and just as soon as they were like, yes, I can do it now, then they would. And take selfies and share them to friends.
Can you tell me how you decided that color's right for you? So when you try out a new color or makeup or anything, that you're just like, yes, this is the one. Like, how do you, is it just you deciding?
It is, but I think earlier I would either go shopping with friends or I would like selfie and send and be like, does this look good? Do you like this thing or this thing better? And I've definitely gotten like eyeglasses and makeup, you know, just random image, you know, and a text message to be like, what do you think? Kind of along the lines of that sending the email to see how people react. And then I just like, you know, no. Or like, yeah, that's awesome. So, yeah.
You had said that you found out about new products to sort of use in your routine via Facebook. Was that recommendations from friends and family, or were they just advertisements that you had seen on the site?
Almost all friends and family. I think I've bought one thing off of a Facebook ad, and they were running shoes because they're really bright colored, which I like. But I think that was luck. But it's always either I ask and someone answers, or I will see, say, one of my friends who is also a runner recommending something, or you know, someone who is also a parent recommending an easy thing, and I'll be like, okay, they probably know.
And when you ask, who do you normally ask?
I usually just blast it out. I figure all the men in my feed can just ignore it. Yeah. Right. Any last questions? I think this is good, but. All right. Thank you so much. And please send me samples and ask me to buy more things. So. Awesome. Yeah. So that's, I mean, like I said, I'm a very forthcoming interviewee, but you will sometimes hear people say things where you're like, I probably could ask this person to spend more money, or I could sell this person more things, and you haven't asked. So that's a really kind of useful thing to get out. So let's debrief. This is all you guys too. What was good about this interview?
Stop talking. Yes, question. Stop talking.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Let's see. We'd already had kind of the intro, so we just kind of started off with like, I want to hear from you. There wasn't a lot about it. Usually that kind of intro of, this is what I do, oh, I'm a customer, that would usually take place in kind of over email or over the outreach. So that part went well. I think he asked some good follow-up questions, kind of poking at things. I think as an audience, I give you guys an A, because you asked good follow-up questions in terms of like, what else would you do, or how do you discover things, or what are your constraints? So I think this is actually pretty good interview. Let's see if there's specific things we're gonna go through here. Okay, so did the interview start off well? Yep. Do we ask any accidentally leading questions? I don't think so. I didn't hear any. So that's probably okay. Were there questions that didn't work? I don't know. Not from my perspective. What else would you have asked? If you were doing your next interview, what else would you want to ask?
More specifically around, well, so for me right now, the reason why I'm getting into these routines, we're getting into more product lines that are addressing particular issues. So just gray hairs and the roots isn't one of the big ones that I'm diving into, but there's other issues such as brassiness or color fading. That's why I kind of started to dig into the fading piece to understand a little bit more around how open you were to that and how then like, how would I present that to you in a way that would compel you to add it to your subscription? So is it something where it's an all-in-one service, it's a bundle, something that you mentioned it's all about time for you, so really diving more deeply into how that would save you time.
Okay. Let's see. So definitely I think things that I would probably ask would be whoever asked about how much I spend, because like you discovered that I'm basically price insensitive, within reason. Some things about like how I discover products, I'd want to know a little bit more about that, because, the beauty industry was kind of created to make people, the cynical view is to make people feel bad about themselves and want to do better. So if you told me that brassiness was an issue, I might honestly be like, I don't know, is it? I'll try a sample. Like, maybe I'll feel better afterwards. Gietta?
I thought there was a part of your questions. Oh yeah, you really dug in straight on the hair care, and she recommended that we like take a step back from that, and only because she started talking about that you do face masks and maybe teeth whitening, that you'd be interested in something else for your hair. So I thought
I kind of did that intentionally just because I was trying to get into the routine faster than actually just beauty in general, since I have a lot of info around beauty for most customers.
Okay, yeah, but I think generally, yes, you would kind of want to know like what other things, because that gives you, and you still, white strips, that's like half hour, right? So now I'll do basically anything that I can do in a half an hour, especially if it shows up in my box magically. You could give me something about brassiness, I'm like, I don't know, put it on with the white strips, and it'll be fine. So yeah.
Did you say you wait until the next shipment's coming before you do the treatment?
No, it's sometimes I just notice the white and then I'm like, I do this right away. But I will get the email saying we're about to ship you another box, and sometimes I will look and I will see that there's still a box on my dresser, and then I'll be like, I should push out the other one. And usually that's when I know like I've needed to do this for a while, and so I reschedule a lot, which is fine, which is also probably an opportunity of like, hey, we notice you always reschedule. Like, I'm sure there's something we could sell you to solve this problem. I'm sure there is something you could sell me along the lines of, hey, if you're really frazzled, you should, I don't know, buy something. That's always the answer. You always want to get more out of people. So yeah, I think those are good questions. What else would we do differently? As he said in his case, he's digging in on a specific thing. So this focus was in line with the information he needed to gather. If he was earlier stage, he would definitely want to know more about more of my beauty routine, and probably also more of like what would spawn you to make choices. Like, should they encourage me to, listen to what my Facebook friends are saying more, or should they send me more samples, or, remind me that, maybe I should worry about those unsightly whatevers, along those lines. What did we learn? We're running low on time, so we can kind of skip over this because we talked about this a little bit, but basically, whenever we do these as a team, I'm a big fan of having a quick debrief afterwards. If you do them by yourself, it's also useful to have a little self-debrief, which is like, what did I learn? What was useful? What in this do I really need to communicate to a coworker? And how do I kind of take this vast morass of thing I learned and summarize it down? So The learning share out template is a big thing that has been helpful for me in getting my own thoughts together, but also kind of, as I said, bringing people along. So you want to focus, and you don't need to do this after every interview, probably be overkill, but every 5 or so, or every week or so, we went into this interview or this week thinking blah. Like, this is our starting point. Started here. And then we learned this. And I'm really a big fan of summarizing down to like 5 bullet points, whatever the 5 most interesting are, that go along the lines of this invalidated the thing that we thought. This validated things that we thought. This is where this person got really enthusiastic. This is some places where the person was really frustrated, or I kind of got the sense of like we could do something great with them here. And then you have all that, so that's your summary. And here's what we're going to do next. So in his case, he might be like, and next I'm going to focus on finding more customers who, care about all these other things and interview them. And next I'm going to think about how we could A/B test the current we're about to send you more hair dye email to convince you that you should buy stuff. And what this does is it provides kind of an ongoing narrative. So the people on your team who are not doing these interviews have this sense of, oh, okay, this is where things kind of kicked off. And so if you're doing this and you're changing a lot, your team has that, like, what? I thought we were talking to engineers, now we're talking to product managers, what happened here? But if you kind of have these short emails everyone can read, we thought our customer was X, this is what we heard, we drew a conclusion that this customer doesn't care about this product, next we're going to talk to this new kind of customer. Or we thought that people spent a lot of time doing X, we learned that they actually spend very little time doing X, but yes, it is actually very frustrating, and so it's still a problem they want to tackle, and next we're going to build a prototype, do an A/B test, do an MVP, talk to different customers, do 20 more interviews. And so you have to get this sense of like that things are kind of progressing all along.
I have a question on that topic that I personally encountered, fell into this trap a little bit, is when you're looking at this customer type, there's actually, at least in our business, there's a strong selection bias for the type of person who's going to accept the interview, to want like really weird things. And when you're just learning a new industry, you actually don't know that those things are weird. So, with the hair dye, maybe you're only interviewing like ravers who want blue hair, and you're just interviewing these people who want blue hair, but really no one wants blue hair. Do you have any strategies or techniques to like ask customers to make sure that they're like a good representative example? Like, this person is like a typical owner of a civil engineering firm, that this is a person who owns a civil engineering firm and like is building like liquid fueled rockets in his spare time and just like toys.
Mm-hmm. So I think at some level, if you can find a lot of this kind of person, that might actually be a viable customer base. And you have kind of a balance between how much is each person going to pay you and how many customers do you need. So if you're extracting a lot of value from each customer, it might be okay to have a niche. If you're extracting minimal value, then you might need to go broader. This is where I'm a big fan of having friends in the industry you're in that you can gut check things off. So you might have a friend who's never going to actually be your customer, but could say, is it weird that everyone we've talked to is asking me about liquid rocket fuel? And they'd say, like, who are these people you're talking to? Just like someone who can do that level of sound check for you can be really useful. In general, I say that it's very likely that you'll encounter at least one nutcase, but it's really hard to run into 5 in a row. So if you have 5 people and they're all asking like for really consistent weird things, that weird thing might actually be fine. But the counter is to also say, what do these people have in common? Let's find someone who's technically within our customer segment, but is as little like them as possible. So if you talk to a bunch of civil engineering folks and they were all dudes who graduated from MIT who were about 40, like go find a civil engineering firm that is run by like a woman of color who grew up in another country and do an interview on her. And if you hear completely different things, then maybe you think about like how do we diversify our base. If she's also talking about rocket fuel, then go in peace, do rocket fuel. All right. And we're at time. But basically just, this is a new process for most teams. Encourage people to participate. Encourage skepticism. The people on your team who are like, this is not statistically significant. You're right, it's not, it never will be, that's okay. People say, I think you just talk to dumb customers. Like, okay, well, who should we talk to next? Like, that could be valid. Like, work with me, let's do this better. But when you kind of shovel things under the rug, that's when everyone just stops listening to you and starts tuning you out and kind of sabotages. So encourage skepticism, encourage questions, make people be note takers, and that's about it. So this is a Microsoft-specific thing, but you can talk to me at any time. I am Cindy Alvarez. I am very Googleable. There's contact information in here as well. And I really do like getting random questions from people about weird customer development challenges that they're running into. So thank you all.